Sometimes, a single question can change two lives forever. When billionaire alpha Theo Langley was unexpectedly asked, "Could you mate with my mute son today?" he believed it was impossible, but that one extraordinary request would lead him to Salem, uncovering a story of trust, healing, and a love neither of them ever expected.
Chapter 1: The question nobody expected. The question came out of nowhere. No build-up. No context. No warning. Just a silver-haired woman in a flour-dusted apron, leaning across a diner table like she was asking a man to try the soup special and saying, "Could you mate with my mute son today?" Salem Drax stopped mid-reach. His hand, the one extending toward the bourbon glass, went completely still. The glass sat there sweating cold water rings onto the laminate table. The neon signs outside buzzed. Somewhere in the kitchen, a pan hit the stovetop with a sharp metallic clang that nobody in the diner reacted to except to go a little more still. Nobody moved. The two regulars at the counter suddenly found their coffee cups extremely interesting. The cook behind the pass-through window went quiet. Even the ceiling fan seemed to slow down, like the whole room had taken a breath and was holding it. And Salem Drax, billionaire, shipping empire owner, a man whose name made freight brokers across 6 continents lose sleep, just sat there. He didn't speak, because in all his years of navigating hostile takeovers, underground alpha syndicate contracts, and boardroom confrontations that had left grown men quietly shaking, nobody, not once, had opened with that. The woman clasped both hands on the table like she was praying, or like a woman who had already decided exactly what she wanted and was waiting for the universe to catch up. Her name was Dorinda Calderon. She ran the diner, had for 22 years. Small place, south side of Chicago. Red vinyl booths that had seen better decades. A jukebox in the corner that still worked if you hit it on the left side. The kind of block where people kept their heads down, knew which cars belonged and which didn't, and never ever asked why a man in a $5,000 suit was eating alone at a corner booth on a Tuesday afternoon. She didn't look scared of him. That was the first strange thing. Every person who knew Salem Drax's name was at least slightly afraid of him. That was by design. Fear was efficient. Fear kept meetings short and deals honest. It was a tool he'd spent 15 years sharpening inside an industry where showing any kind of softness meant someone slipped a hand into your pocket. Dorinda Calderon looked at him like he was a contractor she was interviewing for a kitchen renovation. Like she had already done her research and decided he would do, but needed to confirm a few specifics. "My son," she said again, a little slower, not louder. The way you repeat something for someone you've decided misheard you rather than ignored you. "Theo. He's in the back. He's a good boy. Sharp. Better with systems than anyone I've ever met. You can see for yourself before you decide anything. But the claim notice came this morning, and I've got until Thursday before Vance Morrow sends people over here, and I need someone to sign a counterclaim before." "Ma'am." Salem's voice came out even and controlled, the voice he used in depositions, in rooms where someone was lying and he needed them to know that he knew. "I don't know what you think I know exactly who you are." She didn't raise her voice. Didn't need to. Her eyes were dark and steady, and they had the specific patience of someone who had watched powerful men walk through her door for 20 years and wasn't impressed by any of them anymore. "And I know you came here because Darnell Weiss has been siphoning your freight accounts through a shell company operating 2 blocks from this diner. So let's not pretend this is a social call." The diner went even more still. Salem went very still. She knew about Darnell. He had not told a single person about Darnell Weiss. Not his legal team, not his personal security, not his CFO, not his attorney. That information was buried inside 3 layers of encrypted internal audit trails, and Salem had only confirmed it himself 48 hours ago, alone, in his office at 11:30 at night after 3 months of careful, quiet watching. He looked at Dorinda Calderon with entirely different eyes. She looked back, calm, waiting, like she had all the time in the world. "You've got some information," he said carefully. "I've got a lot of information." She still didn't blink. "And a son who needs a counterclaim signature by tomorrow morning. You do that for me, I give you everything you need on Darnell Weiss. Every account, Every transfer date. Every offshore shell company name. Everything. Hi viewers. Have you ever been in a situation where someone surprised you so completely you forgot how to say no? Where you walked in thinking you had full control of a room, and halfway through realized you'd never had it at all? Drop it in the comments. Because what happened next, nobody in that diner saw it coming. Salem leaned back. He studied her the way he studied acquisition targets, looking for the soft spots. The places where confidence was a bluff, where desperation was bleeding through a good front. He looked for a full 30 seconds. He didn't find any. Bring the sun out, he said. Dorinda stood, smoothed her apron, and walked toward the kitchen without another word, like she had already known that would be his answer. The diner settled. The regulars unstiffened. The cook started moving again. The ceiling fan resumed its lazy circles. Salem picked up his bourbon. He had not come to Chicago to mate anyone. That was not on any schedule in any version of his life. He had come to confirm that his accountant of 11 years had been systematically stealing from him for 3, and to decide what to do about it. He had a flight back to New York at 6. A board presentation Thursday morning. A conference call with Sol at 5 Friday. He was not going to sign a mating claim. He was absolutely not going to do that. He was completely clear on this. The kitchen door swung open, and Theo Calderon walked out. He wasn't what Salem expected. Most people brought into an alpha's field of vision in a mating context came in already shaped by what the situation required. Eyes down, shoulders drawn in, body language that said, I know what role is expected here and I've already begun playing it. It wasn't weakness. It was strategy. It was the way Omegas flagged on the scent compatibility registry as high yield had learned to move through the world, because the alternative, being seen as unbothered, occupying space with intention, got read as a challenge. And challenges had consequences. Theo Calderon walked in like he owned the floor he was standing on. Young, mid-20s, lean in the way of someone who stays on their feet all day. He had a dry erase board on a cord around his neck and a black marker tucked behind his left ear, and he was still wearing the kitchen apron, which had a long diagonal streak of what looked like marinara sauce across the left panel. Dark eyes. The kind of expression that didn't recalibrate based on who was in the room. He looked at Salem, not at the floor, not at the table or the hands or the suit. At Salem, directly, and he didn't look away. Most Omegas in territory-controlled neighborhoods moved through public space with practiced minimization. No sustained eye contact, minimal presence. It was survival behavior, not fragility, and anyone who'd spent time in these blocks understood exactly why. But that understanding didn't make it less striking when someone simply didn't do any of it. Theo Calderon was studying him, the exact way Salem studied balance sheets. Patient, methodical, documenting something for later use. Salem took a long, slow sip of bourbon and said, "Sit down." Theo pulled out the chair across the table and sat. He uncapped the marker, wrote something on the board, turned it around, said, "You smell like money and attention headache." Salem stared at the board. 3 full seconds. And then, somewhere deep in his chest, where he kept things that were not professionally useful, a small laugh pressed up and tried to get out. He didn't let it. "Your mother says you need a counterclaim signature," he said. Theo erased the board with the back of his hand. Wrote again, fast and clean. Vance Morrow filed territorial intent at 9 this morning. Under syndicate contract law, I have 72 hours before a binding claim hearing. If an established alpha files a counterclaim before that window closes, the syndicate can't initiate forced proceedings against me. Why not go to a lawyer? File a protection injunction? The 3 territorial judges in this district have received documented campaign contributions from Morrow's holding companies over the past 8 years. I checked their public disclosure filings last year. An injunction here takes 6 weeks minimum and gets dismissed on a technicality at week 4. I have 3 days. Salem turned the glass slowly in his hands, kept his eyes on Theo's face while he thought. Why me specifically? This city is full of alphas. Theo looked at him for a long moment, not a dramatic pause. The kind of pause that belongs to someone choosing words with precision, not effect. He wrote slowly, because you're the only alpha who's walked into this neighborhood in 3 years who isn't already paying someone in Morrow's network. And because Morrow filed an emergency response within 2 hours of your car parking on this block. Which means he's scared of what you represent here. Scared men make mistakes. I need someone who generates that specific fear without owing it anything. Salem set the glass down. He turned that last part over carefully. He hadn't expected the calm precision of it. No plea. No performance of helplessness. Just a young man who had done the full math on a bad situation and arrived at the only table he could identify with a coherent argument. The smart move was to stand up. Walk out. Call his pilot. Let Dorinda's information come through a proper channel if it was real. Keep his clean lines clean. He looked at Theo. Theo looked back. There was something in the directness of it that settled uncomfortably under Salem's sternum and refused to move. If I sign the counterclaim, Salem said lower now, it triggers bond resonance protocols. That's not a small legal formality. That has biological implications. Legal implications. That lasts. Theo wrote without pause. I understand everything about it. Everything is a large word. I know exactly what bond resonance means clinically, legally, and practically. I also know what Thursday morning looks like without a counterclaim on file. I've run both calculations completely. I'm asking you to run yours. Salem was quiet. The ceiling fan turned. The cook hummed something low. The regular 2 stools down stirred his coffee for the 4th time, which meant he'd stopped drinking it and was just doing something with his hands. I need a pen, Salem said. Dorinda materialized from somewhere behind him. She had clearly never moved more than 8 feet away, and produced a pen from her apron pocket before he'd finished the sentence. Salem took it, looked at the claim papers she slid across the table. Already printed. Already dated. His full legal name typed at the top of the signatory line. She'd pulled his legal information before he walked through the door. He looked up at her. She met his gaze without any apology at all. He looked back down. He signed. And right there, in that sticky-floored diner with the neon lights buzzing and the ceiling fan turning and a mute man watching him from across a laminate table, Salem Drax made the single biggest miscalculation of his professional life. He thought he was signing paperwork. He had absolutely no idea he was signing into a war. Dorinda collected the papers with both hands, folded them precisely once, and tucked them into her apron pocket like she was storing something she'd been waiting a long time to file. Theo stood, recapped the marker, and walked back toward the kitchen without looking at Salem again. Like the meeting was finished. Like he had gotten what he came for. Salem picked up his bourbon. His phone buzzed. His New York attorney. He silenced it. He sat in the corner booth while the diner eased back to its ordinary sounds. Plates scraping. Coffee being poured from a pot that had been sitting too long. The cook's radio murmuring something low through the pass-through. He should have felt settled. Like a man who had made a transaction and understood exactly what it cost. Instead, he felt like he had stepped onto a chessboard that was already mid-game, and he couldn't see where all the pieces were. He was still sitting there, 23 minutes later, when Marcus slipped in through the side entrance and bent close enough to speak quietly. Sir, we have a problem. Salem didn't look up. Vance Morrow's attorney filed an emergency territorial override 19 minutes ago, challenging the counterclaim on procedural grounds. They're claiming coercive context, and they've requested a 72-hour accelerated arbitration hearing. Tomorrow morning, federal syndicate panel, 2 oversight seats. Salem set the glass down, carefully, the way he set things down when he was managing something internal that didn't need to be visible. A federal syndicate arbitration panel. Not what you called in for a routine territorial dispute. You called that in when you needed something done fast and when you had enough institutional weight behind you to make the outcome lean before the other side finished understanding what room they were standing in. Salem looked at the kitchen door. Theo Calderon was back there somewhere. Saw stained apron, dry erase board, moving through the kitchen like he owned the shift. And Vance Morrow, one of the most connected syndicate figures on the eastern seaboard, had called in a federal panel within 20 minutes of a counterclaim being signed. 20 minutes. That was not the response to a territorial claim. That was the response to a specific threat. What did Theo Calderon have that made a man like Vance Morrow move that fast? Salem looked at his bourbon glass. He didn't drink it. He stood up, straightened his jacket, and walked toward the kitchen. Chapter 2: The Wrong Kind of Rescue. The penthouse door had barely closed when Theo Calderon walked to the window. Not to look at the view. Not to take in 43 floors of Manhattan spread below him like a lit-up circuit map, the East River running dark and silver in the distance, the city's grid stretching out until it blurred at the horizon. Not to do any of the things people usually did the first time they stood in a room that expensive. He walked to the window the way a man walks to a wall when he needs to think. Pressed the back of his fingers lightly against the glass. Stood there. Salem watched him from across the room. He had 16 hours before the arbitration hearing. Holloway was on 3 simultaneous calls. His CFO had been forwarded a preliminary flag about the Crestline Freight Partners contracts and was in the kind of quiet panic Salem could feel through the phone even when they weren't speaking. The guest suite was prepared. Security was posted at 2 points in the building. Everything had been arranged. Except Theo was not acting like someone who had been brought somewhere safe. He was acting like someone who had arrived at a workstation. After exactly 4 minutes at the window, Salem clocked it without deciding to. Theo turned around. He scanned the room with those dark, measuring eyes, not admiring it, cataloging it. Then he walked to the nearest flat surface, the glass coffee table, sat cross-legged on the floor in front of it, and opened a laptop bag that Salem had not seen him pick up at any point in the last 6 hours, but that had apparently been on him the entire time. Salem walked closer. The hearing is at 9. My attorney will brief you tonight on what to expect. Theo held up one finger. Not rudely. With the focused precision of a surgeon who needs everyone in the room to understand that interruptions have a cost. He typed for about 45 seconds. Turned the screen around. Your shipping ledger. Chicago Regional. Freight Contracts 2019 to present. You have 6 active contracts running through subsidiary holding companies belonging to Morrow's network. I need to know if that's intentional or incidental before we go any further. Salem looked at the screen, then at Theo. How did you get into my ledger? Theo turned the screen back, typed, showed him again. Your Chicago regional server has been sitting without a firewall patch for 11 months. Your internal IT system has an open ticket for this specific vulnerability. The ticket is tagged medium priority, unresolved. I didn't break anything. An open door is not a locked one. Salem took out his phone and sent 3 words to Marcus. Lock Chicago server. He put the phone away. You accessed my corporate system, he said, stating it. Not performing outrage. In my penthouse. Within 40 minutes of arriving. Theo tilted his head slightly. He wrote on the board. The 6 Morrow contracts. Did you know? Salem stood with that question for a moment. He knew about Crestline Freight Partners. He'd signed those agreements 3 years ago during a port expansion, and his due diligence team had cleared the holding company as independently operated. But he had not, until this moment in this room, seen anyone draw a straight line from Crestline to Morrow specifically. No, he said. I didn't know the connection. Theo looked at him. The weighing look. He wrote, Then what I'm about to show you is going to land hard. I need you to stay useful when it does. Salem pulled out a chair. Show me. Theo turned the laptop around and navigated through a folder structure with the easy speed of someone moving through a system they know completely. He pulled up a file that opened wide across the screen, spreadsheets, patent registration documents, pharmaceutical trial protocols, corporate cross-reference tables, financial mapping software that had been built from scratch. He stopped on one document, turned the screen around. The header read, Olfactory Profile Commodification, Predictive Market Model. Prototype version 4.2. Patent pending. T. Calderon. Salem read. First page. Second. Third. He read the 3rd page twice. You built this, he said. Theo wrote, over 4 years. Mostly nights. First version coded on a second-hand laptop at the counter after closing. While working the diner. My mother doesn't know everything I was doing during those shifts. Salem kept reading. The algorithm didn't just map scent compatibility. It mapped the entire financial anatomy of how scent data was being collected, profiled, sold, and used across the registered territory network. It cross-referenced biological registry filings with pharmaceutical patent applications. It traced payment flows from biotech companies back to the syndicate structures funding them. It built a prosecutable evidence trail automatically from publicly available documents that had never been assembled into a single coherent system before, because nobody had thought to look at them together, until Theo did. This would legally expose every scent auction in the registered territory network, Salem said. Every single one. The entire legal framework for Omega biological contracts would have to restructure. The illegal ones collapse. The legitimate ones, the ones built on actual consent, those survive and get stronger. That's the point. Not to destroy the system, to make the illegal parts of it visible. Morrow filed territorial intent 8 months after you submitted this patent. His people found out about the filing 3 weeks after I submitted it. Someone inside the registry office flagged it. The territorial claim took 8 months to build because they needed it to look procedural. They couldn't come at me directly. Too visible. Too much attention. They don't want to destroy the algorithm. Theo looked at him steadily. He wrote, they want to own it. If Morrow's network acquires this patent, the same system I built to expose scent commodification becomes the system that perfects it. Makes it invisible. Makes it legally airtight. My algorithm in the wrong hands doesn't end that market. He paused. Erased. Wrote one more line. It makes that market untouchable. Salem sat back. The full shape of it was assembling layer by layer. Morrow hadn't filed a territorial claim because he wanted Theo. He had filed it because Theo had built something capable of pulling the whole structure down, and Morrow needed the person attached to it either inside his control or completely removed from any position where they could deploy it. The mating claim was just the legal mechanism, the cover that made it look routine. What Morrow actually wanted was the patent, and the person who could explain it, expand it, make it work for him instead of against him. Salem looked at the map on the next page. Colored nodes, lines, 31 companies, Eastern Seaboard, all connected by money and contracts and shipping infrastructure and biological data and years of decisions made by people who knew what they were building, and by people who hadn't looked closely enough to see it. His eyes moved to the left side of the map. He found the node immediately. A logistics company, 3 corporate levels down from his name, acquired in 2021 during a port expansion deal. Reviewed once during due diligence and never again because the numbers had been clean and nothing had flagged. His company, on Theo Calderon's map, connected to a network that tracked and sold the biological profiles of living people. Salem didn't say anything for a long time. Finally he said, "You knew about this before you sat down at that table today." Theo wrote, "I told you. I wasn't proving anything. I was measuring. You measured whether I was someone worth showing this to." He wrote, "I measured whether you were someone who could stand next to it without running. There's a difference between knowing something and being willing to act on it. I needed to see which kind you were." Salem looked at his own hands on the table. He had not built the system, had not designed the market, had not known, genuinely, completely had not known, that a logistics subsidiary 3 corporate levels down was sitting inside a network built on the auctioning of human biological data. But not knowing didn't clean his node off the map. Not knowing hadn't stopped his freight terminals from moving Veritech Biosciences supply shipments every quarter for 3 years. The line between complicit and innocent was not drawn by intention. It was drawn by documentation, by what you could prove you knew and when. And Salem's documentation included an 11-month-old unresolved IT ticket and a contracts director who had made careful, invisible decisions for 9 years. "I need everything," Salem said. "Not just the map, the full file, every piece you have." Theo looked at him. Then he turned the laptop around and opened the complete archive. 4 years of work. organized with the precision that comes from working alone without anyone to hand things off to. Section labeled, date stamped, cross-referenced, everything built to stand on its own. It was meticulous. It was the most comprehensive private investigation into systemic financial exploitation that Salem had ever seen. He leaned over the table and started reading. Theo got up quietly. The sounds of water running. A stovetop. 17 minutes later, a cup of coffee appeared at Salem's right elbow. He picked it up without looking away from the screen. Theo sat back down and opened his own laptop. They worked in silence for an hour. Then Salem stopped on a document deep inside the archive. A legal consultation record from 8 months ago. Scanned and organized like everything else. The header listed the reviewing legal firm for the patent application's conflict of interest clearance. A firm Salem recognized, because it was the firm his senior contracts director Isaiah Frett had been using for secondary consultations for 6 years. His hand went still on the table. Isaiah Frett. 9 years. In every room where the critical decisions were made. The man who drafted the Crestline Freight Partners agreements. Who recommended the Veritech Biosciences Logistics Partnership. Who had been present quietly, methodically, in every decision that placed Salem's companies one careful degree of separation from a market built on biological exploitation. And his firm's name was in Theo Calderon's patent consultation records. Which meant Isaiah Frett had known about the algorithm before Morrow filed the claim. Had almost certainly been the one who told Morrow it existed. Salem looked up slowly. Theo was watching him. Not with triumph. Not with the look of someone delivering a blow. Waiting. Measuring. Watching what Salem did with what he now knew. For months, Salem said. You've had this for 4 months. Theo wrote. I brought it when I found someone worth bringing it to. His phone buzzed. Holloway. Tight voice. Salem. The panel expanded. 2 federal oversight seats. This is no longer a territorial hearing. It's a preliminary investigation into Omega biological contract law violations. And your name appeared on the docket 35 minutes ago. They're positioning me as the infrastructure. Using your subsidiary's Veritech contracts as primary documentation. If this hearing goes the way they're building it, Morrow walks and you absorb everything. Pull everything on Isaiah Frett. Tonight. He hung up. He looked at Theo. Show me the federal submission package, he said. Chapter 3, What Apology Can't Fix. Salem said the name out loud at 1:14 in the morning. Isaiah Frett. Quiet. Almost to himself. The way you say something when you've been circling it for an hour and finally commit to landing. The penthouse was still. The city wasn't. Theo watched Salem say it. Watched the way it landed, not like a surprise, more like a weight confirming its own mass. He watched Salem's face move through 4 things quickly. Disbelief that was already halfway to acceptance before it arrived. Cold recognition underneath that. Anger. And then something harder to name. The specific stillness that settles in a person when they understand the betrayal didn't come from an enemy. It came from someone trusted for 9 years. Someone trusted enough to never look twice at. That kind of thing doesn't explode. It goes quiet, goes down deep and stays cold. Salem stood from the table, walked to the window, both hands in his pockets, back straight, looking at the city without seeing any particular part of it. Theo didn't fill the silence. That was one of the things about Theo, and Salem was beginning to catalog these things the same way Theo cataloged him, that kept landing unexpectedly. Most people filled silence. Couldn't help it. A quiet room made people nervous, and nervousness made people talk. Explanations. Reassurances. The noise people generate when they don't know what else to do with an uncomfortable moment. Theo had no reflex to fill silence. He let it be what it was. Let people have it. Didn't charge anyone for the time it took. Salem stood at the window for 2 full minutes. 9 years, he said. He was in every room where those decisions were made. He recommended Veritech. He structured Crestline. He cleared every acquisition that ended up adjacent to this network. Theo wrote and held up the board. Yes. He was feeding information to Morrow's side. The consultation record connects his firm to 3 Morrow-adjacent legal structures over 5 years. Whether he was directing it or being paid to look away from it, the outcome is functionally the same. Salem turned from the window. His jaw had that locked, controlled set to it. The look of a man processing something significant and deciding none of it would show. "Walk me through exactly what you need from me tonight," he said. "Step by step. Where does my name go and what does it authorize?" Theo turned the laptop around. The federal oversight submission was 47 pages, formatted precisely to the board's filing specifications. Section tabs. Evidence attachments numbered sequentially. Reference footnotes down to the date and confirmation number. Every piece of it deliberate. Nothing in it by accident. And alongside every clause requiring active authorization, in a parallel sidebar column, a plain language translation of what the clause actually meant. Salem stopped when he saw that. He looked at it for a moment. "You annotated it," he said. Theo was watching the screen, not him. He wrote, "People who don't understand what they're agreeing to make decisions that create problems later. I needed you to actually understand this, not just sign it." The unstated part was clear. "I was not going to let you sign something blind. Not even something that helped me. Especially not that." Salem sat down and started reading. He didn't skim. He had not skimmed a single document in 4 hours. He read every clause. Asked 2 specific questions, both about liability scope. Got full answers both times. Not simplified. Complete. The same answer a lawyer would give. He read the affected parties section. Pages of names. Profile codes. Dates. Amounts. Real people. Not data points. Not registry entries. People whose biological information had been auctioned. Some repeatedly. Some without any documented consent process. Some under age at the time of original registration. He stopped at one entry near the middle. Read it twice. He set the laptop gently on the table. Sat back. For a moment he didn't speak. The clock said 2:47 a.m. "I didn't know," he said. Theo was watching him. Not a defense. Not saying it as one. "I know how systems like this work. I know what deliberate ignorance is used for. I know that I had a contracts director I trusted completely and a financial team that processed payments, and I signed acquisition documents for a logistics company 3 corporate levels down without doing a second-level review of its client network. And I know that none of those facts change what my freight terminals were moving every quarter." He stopped. Theo wrote, "You don't owe me a confession. I know. What you do about it is the part that matters. Everything else is between you and your own accounting." Salem looked at him. That line. No sympathy. No piling on. No performance of either. Just here is what matters. Do that thing. Stop talking and do it. "Pull up the authorization," he said. Theo navigated to it. Salem read every clause. Every annotated note. Every liability boundary. He took his time. Asked 2 more clarifying questions. Got full answers. Then he signed. Line by line. With the kind of deliberate line-by-line attention that should have been standard practice 9 years ago. When he finished, Theo pulled the laptop back. His fingers moved over the keyboard, counting under his breath, tapping a finger against his knee. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Salem had noticed this an hour ago and said nothing. 90 seconds. He looked up. He held the board up. Submitted. The Federal Oversight Board receives the package automatically at 6 a.m. When their intake system opens. Timestamp is locked to this session. Cannot be withdrawn or altered by either of us from this point forward. Salem exhaled. One long breath. "Now call Holloway," Theo wrote. "Not before. Before the lock. A call to Holloway means Holloway contacts Isaiah for comment. Professional courtesy. Standard practice. Isaiah moves documents before 6 a.m., and we have a submission without corroborating internal evidence. The submission is already in. Isaiah can move everything he wants now. It doesn't matter." Salem picked up the phone. He told Holloway everything. Isaiah Fret. The consultation record. The Morrow connection. 9 years of careful, invisible decisions. What he could document, what he couldn't, where the gaps needed filling. Holloway was quiet for a long time. Then, "You understand this puts your company formally inside the oversight investigation." "I understand. Your board position, stock price, the sole deal." "I understand." "Salem, the smart move here. Marcus, flat and level. Make the call." He hung up. The room went quiet. Salem set the phone face down on the table. He let the quiet sit. Then Theo wrote and turned the board around. "Your turn to eat. You've been ignoring the food for 2 hours." He pointed at the kitchen counter where Renata had left 2 covered plates sometime in the last hour. Salem stood, walked to the counter, picked both plates up, handed one to Theo. They stood in the kitchen at 4:15 in the morning and ate without sitting down, without conversation, the way people eat when food stopped being about pleasure a while ago. The food was cold. Neither of them said anything about it. After a while Theo set his plate down and picked up the marker. He wrote without looking up from the counter. "You're not what I calculated." Salem looked at the board. "Good or bad?" Theo considered for a moment. He wrote, "Recalculating." Something moved through Salem's chest that he didn't name. He set his plate down, looked at the microwave clock. 4:22 a.m. 4 hours and 38 minutes to the hearing. His phone buzzed on the table. He walked to it. Read the screen. New text. Same unknown number. Last chance. Hand over the patent files by 6 a.m. or we file criminal interference charges against both of you the moment the hearing system opens. Your standing disappears. His patent gets frozen in federal review for years. Think carefully. Salem read it twice. He noted the mechanics of the threat. Criminal interference charges filed at 6 a.m. The same timestamp he'd just locked the submission to. Whoever sent this message had calculated precisely. A 6 a.m. interference filing would freeze the hearing before it could convene, give Morrow's team time to challenge the submission's admissibility before the panel took their seats, and by enough time to replace the arbitration structure entirely. It was a sharp play. It would have worked if the submission weren't already sitting in the federal intake queue with a locked timestamp. Salem put the phone in his pocket. He picked his plate back up. "They think they still have leverage," he said. Theo wrote, "They have leverage on the version of tonight where we didn't submit first. That version doesn't exist anymore. They don't know that yet. They'll know at 6. Salem nodded. They finished eating. He rinsed his plate and set it in the sink. The ordinary gesture of it. Plain domesticity inside what was objectively the most legally complicated night of his professional life. He stood at the sink with the water running and thought about the Federal Protection Protocol clause near the end of the submission authorization. The one that triggered an automatic review of all counterclaims connected to any named party once the submission was logged. Which meant his counterclaim was now part of a federal oversight investigation record. His signature. His name on a mating document. Locked in. What had started as a transaction in a diner on Tuesday. A signature in exchange for information, clean, detached, flight home at 6, was now, legally and formally and permanently, something much harder to define. In the morning, it would not look like a transaction. In the morning, it was going to look like a choice. And choices were judged by what came after them. He turned off the water. Theo was back at the coffee table, working through something on the laptop, moving with that unhurried precision that seemed to be his natural pace. Like he'd made peace with exactly how fast things needed to go and wasn't going to be rushed by anyone who hadn't. Salem walked back to the table, sat down across from him. "Walk me through the 5 most likely moves Morrow's team makes when they see the submission is already filed," he said. Theo looked up. He wrote, "In order of probability or damage potential?" "Both. Start with probability." Theo turned the laptop around. For the next 2 hours, they prepared. Not for the hearing they'd been told to expect. For the one that was actually coming. By the time the first gray light started showing at the edges of the city, they had gone through every scenario Theo had mapped and several Salem had added. They had backup documentation ready for 4 of the 5 likely moves. A communication hold in place for the 5th. At 5:58 a.m., Theo's laptop made a small sound. He looked at the screen. He turned it around. Federal Oversight Board Intake Confirmation. Timestamp 6 a.m. Submission received and logged. Case number generated. The package was in. Salem looked at the confirmation, then at Theo. Theo was watching him with an expression that was almost not quite, but almost something other than measured. He wrote on the board, 2 hours and 58 minutes. The hearing. Salem straightened his jacket, looked at the window. The city was coming up gray and gold and indifferent to everything they'd done in this room overnight. He said, "Get dressed." Theo looked at him. He wrote, "I came from a diner with a sauce stain." "I know." Salem stood. Renata put something in the guest suite. Theo looked at the guest suite door. He wrote on the board and held it up so Salem could see it from across the room. "You were planning to keep me here." Salem stopped. He didn't turn around. He said, "I was planning to be prepared for multiple outcomes." He walked to his own room. Behind him, the guest suite door opened. 3 hours. Everything Theo had spent 4 years building was about to enter a hearing room. And Salem, who had walked into a diner 2 days ago to confirm an accountant was stealing from him and had ended up co-filing a federal oversight submission at 6 in the morning, was about to find out exactly what kind of man he was when the lights came on. He stood in front of his mirror. He had been asking himself that question all night. He still didn't have a clean answer. He was about to get one. Comment below. When Theo held up that board and asked if Salem had planned to keep him there all along, what do you think the real answer was? "I have a theory." Chapter 4 goes straight into that hearing room and nothing, not one single thing, goes the way anyone planned. Chapter 4, the hearing room changes everything. The gavel came down at exactly 9:02 a.m., and the room was already wrong. Not the kind of wrong you could point to immediately. The kind that hits you in the chest before your brain catches up. The kind that comes from watching people arrange themselves and realizing the arrangement isn't what was advertised. There were supposed to be 5 arbitration seats at the panel table. There were 7. The 2 federal oversight additions were seated at the far ends. Both in gray suits. Both with the specific stillness of people who had been in rooms like this many times and had stopped needing to perform authority because they'd simply become it. Salem clocked all of this in 4 seconds. He clocked something else too. Vance Morrow's legal team was already seated. 3 attorneys. Lead counsel was a man named Prescott Langley. Thin, 60-something, silver-haired, the kind of lawyer who made his reputation not by winning arguments but by restructuring the terms of every argument until the other side was fighting on ground he'd already prepared. Langley looked at Salem when he walked in, looked at Theo, and smiled. Not warmly. The smile of a man who had already decided how the room was going to end. Salem walked to his seat without reacting. Theo walked beside him. No borrowed suit. He'd come in the clean dark clothes Renata had put in the guest suite, the dry erase board on its cord, marker tucked behind his ear. He looked exactly like himself. Completely, specifically himself. Salem had expected Theo to look smaller in a federal hearing room. He didn't. Holloway leaned close on Salem's left. Langley filed 3 motions before 6 a.m. 2 procedural. One was a character challenge against Theo, arguing that his muteness was grounds for limited legal standing. Salem kept his face completely neutral. They filed a character challenge for being mute. "I know. That's going to go well for them. I know that too. The oversight chairs denied it 20 minutes ago. But Langley filed it because he wanted it on the record. He's building a frame." Salem understood that immediately. Langley wasn't trying to win the challenge. He was trying to establish a narrative in which Theo Calderon was something less than a full legal person. Something whose evidence could be questioned not on substance but on source. The kind of move that worked slowly, not in one blow but over time, every repetition wearing a little more down. The panel chair, Honorable Carla Weston, 64 years old, 31 years on the bench, looking like a woman who had seen every version of every play Langley ran and was tired of most of them, called the room to order. "This hearing convenes as a dual proceeding," she said, dry, precise. "Territorial claim arbitration in the matter of Morrow versus Calderon." and preliminary federal oversight inquiry into Omega biological contract law violations. Evidence submitted in either proceeding is accessible to both panels. She paused. The Federal Oversight Board received an independent evidence submission at 6 a.m. this morning. That submission has been entered into the record. All parties have constructive notice of its contents. The room shifted. Not everyone, but enough people that the shift was visible. Langley's smile didn't disappear. It just changed character, became something held together more deliberately. He stood and requested a 30-minute recess to review the materials. Denied. Honorable Weston didn't pause. Counsel had constructive notice at 6 a.m. Proceed. That matters. Pause on that. Langley opened. He was good. Genuinely, technically, professionally good. The argument he built in the first 12 minutes was clean and moved from premise to conclusion the way well-built arguments do, with just enough humanity layered in to make the cold machinery underneath less visible. He established Salem's subsidiaries' logistics contracts with Veritech Biosciences, the payment trail, the acquisition timeline, and then the move. The evidence suggests, Langley said, standing with one hand resting on the panel table in the practiced ease of a man making himself at home, that the counterclaim filed by Mr. Drax was not an act of protection. It was an act of concealment, a mechanism to bring a material witness under spousal legal privilege before that witness could be compelled to testify. Mr. Drax did not sign those papers to protect Theo Calderon. A deliberate pause. He signed them to silence him. The room was quiet. Salem did not react. Theo did not react. But the two federal oversight chairs made notes at exactly the same time. That was the argument. Clean. Simple. Devastating if it landed. A counterclaim filed for silence, not protection, which would make Salem not a protector but an obstructor of justice. And if that framing held, everything Theo had submitted, the algorithm, the 4 years of documentation, became fruit of a compromised tree. Holloway stood. He wasn't as polished as Langley. He'd never been the most elegant lawyer in any room. But he was methodical and honest. And in 30 years he had discovered that methodical honesty tended to outlast elegant misdirection over a long enough timeline. He spent 12 minutes walking through the counterclaim timeline. The signing at 2:14 p.m. Tuesday. The emergency override filed by Morrow's team at 2:33 p.m., 19 minutes. He put the timeline on the display. Let it sit. 19 minutes, he said, between a private counterclaim signature in a neighborhood diner, not publicly filed, not publicly announced, and a federal emergency override from Morrow's attorneys. The question is not whether Mr. Drax had improper motives. The question is how Morrow's team knew about that signature in 19 minutes. Langley was on his feet immediately. Objection. Counsel is. Relevance to federal inquiry, Honorable Weston said. Flat. Proceed. Holloway sat down. The panel moved into evidence review. This was where Langley's team had planned their second move. Salem had predicted it during the 4-hour preparation. Theo had confirmed it on the probability list. They went after Isaiah Frett's resignation. Langley stood again. Delivery shifted, less conversational, more formal. The Drax organization's senior contracts director, Isaiah Frett, submitted his resignation this morning at 7:42 a.m. The timing, 1 hour and 18 minutes before this hearing convened, raises significant questions about Mr. Drax's prior knowledge of the contract structures under review. A pause. If Mr. Drax knew about Mr. Frett's role in the Veritech and Crestline agreements last night, then his decision not to disclose this to the panel represents a material omission. Salem looked at Holloway. Holloway stood. Mr. Drax reported Mr. Frett's conduct to this panel's oversight board at 4:47 a.m. this morning, prior to the submission's 6 a.m. lock. Documentation of that report has been entered into the record as Exhibit 14C. Langley paused. For the first time, he hadn't known about 14C, and everyone in the room watched him not know about it. The specific stillness of a man recalculating in public. Honorable Weston looked at the exhibit, then at Langley. Do you wish to respond, Counselor? The Morrow Group requests time to. Your team has had constructive notice since 6 a.m. 1 temperature. Not warming. We will proceed. Langley sat down. Holloway exhaled once beside Salem, but the room wasn't one. Not even close. Because right then Prescott Langley made his real move. Not a legal motion. Not a document challenge. He turned in his chair and looked directly at Theo. Not at Holloway. Not at the panel. Theo. I'd like to call Omega Calderon to present his submitted evidence. The room went quiet. This was the trap. Theo presenting his evidence in person wasn't the trap. The trap was what Langley had been saving, the one move nobody had put on any probability list. The one sitting in his back pocket since the moment he'd heard Theo Calderon was mute. He was going to make Theo perform testimony in a room specifically designed to make performance difficult. Ask technical questions that required long written answers. Time the delays. Make the room wait. Make the panel uncomfortable with the waiting. Make the silence feel like inefficiency, like evidence of a problem, like something to be moved past. Honorable Weston looked at Theo. Theo stood. He walked to the front of the room, connected the laptop to the projection system. 14 seconds. Flat. He positioned himself where both the panel and the screen were visible. Then he turned to Langley. He wrote on the board. He held it up, said ready, and the panel saw it projected full size. One word. Ready. And something in the room recalibrated quietly. Where attention was going. Whose presence was filling the space. Langley stood. Omega Calderon, your submitted evidence claims the olfactory profile commodification algorithm was independently developed without corporate funding or institutional affiliation. Is that correct? Theo wrote. Turned the board. Correct. This development took place over 4 years, primarily in a diner kitchen on the south side of Chicago. Primarily at the counter after closing. Yes. Without any formal education in data science, bioinformatics, or patent law. Theo looked at Langley. He took the marker. He wrote slowly. He turned the board around. Without any formal degree in those fields. Yes. The work speaks for itself. You have it in front of you. Langley smiled. What I have in front of me, he said, is a document making significant claims about the financial behavior of multiple registered corporations. And I want the panel to consider whether a document of this complexity, produced informally, without institutional review, by an individual whose ability to be cross-examined is limited by his condition, should be given the evidentiary weight being proposed. Silence. The word condition, chosen deliberately, designed to land the way it landed. Theo stood at the front of the room. He didn't react, didn't look down, didn't look at Salem, didn't show anything. He turned to the projection screen, and he began. Slide after slide. Not narrated. Not explained verbally. Shown. The sent auction records, cross-matched to biotech patent filings, cross-matched to payment trails, cross-matched to shipping manifests, cross-matched to the registry. Every node documented. Time-stamped. Sourced. Cited. 31 companies. The methodology. The data sources. The cross-validation process. The error margins. The independent verification steps Theo had built in specifically so the algorithm's conclusions could be checked without depending on Theo's explanation of them. He had designed the evidence to work without his voice. From the beginning. Because he had always known this moment was coming. The room watched. For 6 minutes nobody spoke. Not Langley. Not Holloway. Not the panel. Just slides advancing. The picture getting clearer and more specific and more unavoidable with every page. The federal oversight chair on the left side made a note. Then another. Then she stopped making notes and just watched. On the final slide, Theo stopped. He looked at Langley. He wrote. He turned the board. It said, "My condition is that I can hear everything people say about me and remember all of it. Your condition appears to be the same." The room did not erupt. It went quiet in a completely different way than before. The way a room goes quiet when something true has been said that cannot be unsaid and everyone in it is sitting with the weight of it at the same time. Honorable Weston looked at the board. She looked at Theo. For the first time in the entire hearing, something moved in her expression that was not purely procedural. She called a 15-minute recess. Salem stood. Theo was already disconnecting the laptop with the same precise, unhurried movements he did everything with. "You built the whole thing to not need a voice," Salem said quietly. Theo looked up. He wrote, "I built it to not need permission." The recess ended. Honorable Weston called the room to order. She looked at the Morrow legal team. She said 3 words. "Call the respondent." Langley started to stand. "The Morrow group calls." "Not your witness, Mr. Langley." Flat. Calm. "I'm calling the respondent. Vance Morrow." Directly. Total silence. Because Morrow was not in the room. He had sent attorneys. And Honorable Weston, 31 years, every version of every play, was now requiring his presence in person. "This panel is in recess pending Mr. Morrow's appearance. Failure to appear within 2 hours will result in a default judgment on the territorial claim and automatic referral of the federal inquiry to the Department of Justice." Langley's jaw tightened. For the first time all morning, Prescott Langley looked like a man whose plan had a problem. Salem looked at Theo. Theo was already writing. He turned the board. "He's not coming." "How do you know?" Theo erased. Wrote, "If he comes, he's under oath. There are 3 questions in the submission he cannot answer under oath without incriminating himself. He's known that since 6 a.m. Then what happens when he doesn't?" Theo wrote one more line. "Default judgment protects me permanently. DOJ referral starts a real federal investigation. Not a preliminary hearing. A real one." The recess clock ran. At 1 hour and 50 minutes, Langley stood. "The Morrow Group has been unable to reach their client." His voice had lost its architecture. Just flat now. "We are requesting an additional." "Denied." Honorable Weston looked at the clock. 10 minutes left. She looked at the room. She looked at Theo. "Young man, the panel has reviewed your submission in full. One question. Did you build this system to expose the network, or to end it?" The room went still. Theo picked up the marker. He wrote. He held the board up. "To make it impossible to pretend the network didn't exist. What people do after that is up to them. I built the evidence. I don't control what gets built next." Honorable Weston looked at the board for a long moment. She nodded once. She picked up the gavel. Default judgment entered in favor of Omega Calderon on the territorial claim. Federal inquiry referred to the Department of Justice. This panel is adjourned. The gavel came down. The room did not erupt. It exhaled, like something that had been held tight for a very long time finally let go. Salem sat in his chair. He didn't look relieved. He looked like a man who had just learned the difference between a transaction and a reckoning. And he looked at Theo, already capping the marker, looping the board cord back around his neck, already somewhere past the moment everyone else was still standing in. In the hallway, Salem caught up to him. "Where are you going?" Theo wrote without slowing. "Press contact. Journalist meeting at noon. 2 of them. The third option." Third option was always the backup. The federal referral makes them primary now. The investigation needs public documentation to survive a long timeline. Morrow has resources. DOJ investigations take years. The public record has to exist independently. Salem walked beside him. "You planned all 3 simultaneously." Theo glanced at him. He wrote, "I planned for the situation where none of them worked individually. That's how you build something that holds." Salem stopped walking. They were in the corridor. Marble floors. The sound of the hearing room behind them. Attorneys on phones. The federal chairs moving quickly toward an elevator. "After the journalist meeting," Salem said, "come back to the penthouse." Theo looked at him. He wrote, "Why?" Salem stood in the courthouse corridor with a DOJ referral in his future, and a node still on the map and a feeling in his chest that he hadn't had in a very long time. "Because we're not done," he said. It wasn't a command. It was just true. Theo looked at him for a long moment. Then he wrote something on the board, tucked it under his arm, and walked toward the elevator. Salem didn't see what it said until Theo turned once at the elevator door, held the board up briefly, and stepped inside. Said, "I know." The doors closed, and Salem stood there, not finished, not resolved, begun. Chapter 5: What Gets Built Next. 6 months later, Salem Drax testified before the Department of Justice. Not reluctantly, not with a team of attorneys positioned to deflect everything that got too close to something real. He walked in, sat down, and spent 4 hours answering every question they had. About Crestline, about Veritech, about Isaiah Frett, who had by that point accepted a plea agreement and was cooperating with federal investigators in exchange for reduced charges. About the 9 years of contracts that had built a logistics bridge between his empire and a market that bought and sold the biological profiles of living people. He answered everything. The soul deal was gone. He'd known that since the night of the submission. 2 board members had resigned the week after the hearing. His stock dropped 17% in 6 weeks. Recovered 8. The remaining 9 was the cost of the reckoning, and Salem had decided, somewhere in those first 2 weeks, sitting with the numbers instead of fighting them, that he wasn't going to try to minimize it. That the 9% was information. That the market was telling him something true about how the structure he'd built looked now that people could see all of it. He listened. It was the least he could do. Isaiah Frett's cooperation unlocked 11 additional corporate defendants. 6 of the 31 nodes on Theo's map were under active federal investigation. The other 25 were being reviewed. The legal architecture of the Omega Biological Contract Registry was in the middle of a restructuring that federal attorneys said would take 2 to 5 years to complete. 2 to 5 years. That wasn't fast. It was never going to be fast. Structural change was slow. That was how it protected itself. Slow enough that people got tired. Slow enough that the urgency that moved mountains in a hearing room got worn down by timelines and paperwork and the exhaustion of staying engaged with a process that moved in increments too small to feel. Theo understood this better than anyone, which was why 3 months after the hearing, Theo launched the Sent Consent Registry. Not a dismantling of the existing system, parallel one. Built on the algorithms framework, audited quarterly by an independent oversight board, with a public transparency report every 6 months. Every Omega who used it controlled their own profile. Nothing moved without documented consent. Nothing was sold. Nothing was auctioned. Every data request was logged and accessible to the person whose data was requested. Clean. Clear. In the first 2 months, 43,000 Omegas registered. Not because it was mandatory, because it existed. Because someone had built a thing that treated them like people and put it in front of them and let them choose. Salem's company provided the technical infrastructure, not as a transaction, not as a public relations move, as the specific form of reparation available to a man who had moved supply shipments for 3 years without knowing what they carried, and who had decided, when he found out, that not knowing was not the end of the story. The day the registry launched, a reporter named Deja Fontaine. Sharp, fast, the kind of journalist who did her homework so thoroughly that people she interviewed felt like she'd known them longer than she had. Asked Theo the question directly. She held out the recorder. She said, "Did he save you?" Theo looked at the recorder. He picked up the marker. He wrote on the board. He turned it around. Said, "No. We corrected each other." Deja Fontaine looked at the board. Then she looked at Salem, standing 2 feet to Theo's left, which was where he had been standing since the day of the hearing. Not in front. Not behind. Just beside. She wrote down the quote. The story ran the next morning. The quote was the headline. In the diner that same morning, Dorinda's Southside Chicago, same red vinyl booths, same ceiling fan, same jukebox that still needed the left side hit first. Dorinda Calderon read the headline on her phone while the breakfast rush was starting. She set the phone down on the counter. She looked through the pass-through window into the kitchen. She shook her head slowly. The warm, exasperated shake of a woman who has been right about something for a very long time and is choosing, for once, not to say so out loud. She tucked the phone into her apron pocket, put on her best face, went back to work. 3 weeks after that, Salem walked into the diner on a Thursday afternoon. No security detail. No attorney. No agenda that had been calendared and approved. He sat down in the corner booth. The same one. He ordered the bourbon. Theo came out of the kitchen 20 minutes later. Not because anyone called him. He knew the car. He sat down across the table. Dry erase board. Marker. Apron with a different stain in the same general location as the last one. He looked at Salem. Salem looked at him. "I've been thinking," Salem said. Theo waited. "The registry is running. The investigation is moving. The infrastructure is in place." A pause. "You don't need the counterclaim anymore. Not legally. Not for protection." Another pause. "The kind that means something. I wanted to be clear that I know that." Theo looked at him for a long moment. He picked up the marker. He wrote. He turned the board around. It said, "Are you asking me something?" Salem looked at the board. Then at Theo. "Yes," he said. Theo considered. He wrote, "Then ask it." Salem sat in the corner booth of a Southside diner with the ceiling fan turning and the neon signs buzzing and the sound of someone humming in the kitchen. And he asked. Not the way he asked for things he needed strategically. Not the way he asked for things he'd already calculated the likely answer to. The way people ask when they genuinely don't know the answer and are willing to sit with whatever comes back. Theo listened. He looked at the table for a moment. He picked up the marker. He wrote slowly. He turned the board around. And whatever it said made Salem Drax, who had moved through the world for 41 years without letting anything move him toward something he couldn't control, sit back in that booth and exhale. The long exhale of a man who had been holding something for a very long time and had finally put it down. The ceiling fan turned. Dorinda appeared. She always appeared and refilled the bourbon without being asked. She looked at the two of them. She rolled her eyes. The warm, exasperated roll of a woman who has been right about something since the Tuesday afternoon she asked a billionaire to mate her son and watched his hand go still over a bourbon glass. She went back to the counter without a word. Months later, a journalist would ask Salem on the record when he knew things had changed. When the counterclaim had stopped being legal positioning and become something he actually meant. Salem was quiet for a moment. He said, "I'd call it a business decision." The journalist wrote it down. But Dorinda Calderon, watching the interview on her phone from behind the counter, shook her head one slow time, because she had been there, 8 feet away. She had heard every word and seen every face. And she knew. Had known from the moment that hand stopped reaching for the bourbon and went perfectly still. It was never a business decision. Not for 1 second. Not from the very first word. If the story moved something in you, if you saw yourself in Theo's quiet, or in Salem's reckoning, or even in Dorinda standing 8 feet away and knowing the whole time, leave a comment right now. Tell us which moment hit you. Tell us which line you're still thinking about. Because that comment might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. And if you want to be here when the next story drops, subscribe right now and turn on that notification bell. The next story coming to this channel starts quietly and ends with the entire room changing. You don't want to come in late on that one. Hit subscribe. Turn on notifications. Share this with someone who needs to hear what it sounds like when people stop protecting their own comfort and start standing next to something true. We'll see you in the next one.
Was Theo right to accept such an unusual request, or should he have questioned it from the very beginning? Sometimes the most life-changing decisions begin with uncertainty, reminding us that good intentions should always be guided by honesty, trust, and mutual respect. The story of Theo and Salem may have come to an end, but countless other stories are still unfolding around us, each becoming another colourful piece of life's remarkable mosaic. Every unexpected encounter has the power to change someone's future. Thank you for choosing to spend your time with Blue Fox BL. We truly appreciate your support. If you're listening tonight, we wish you a peaceful night and a restful sleep. And if you're listening while working or going about your day, we wish you a wonderful day filled with happiness, success, and many good things ahead.